Hi, I'm Emerson. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm Senior Marketing Content Editor here at Career Foundry. I've worked at Career Foundry for a couple of years now. I'm really passionate about UX writing, microcopy, and inclusive design, which is where this is kind of a beautiful intersection of all those things. I see people typing in where they're from. This is really nice, diverse, widespread group. This is awesome. So before we get started, I mentioned my pronouns. So if there's cause to refer to me with pronouns, they, them, not she, her, or he, him. Few other notes. We're going to be talking about inclusion in the context of UX writing. So as I created this, I had UX writers in mind. That said, as I created this, I realized this is so broadly applicable in so many ways, regardless of what kind of content you're creating and even beyond content creation. So whether you're managing things or whatever you're doing, the process that we'll talk about here is very much adaptable. So keep that in mind. Because it's Pride Month, there's a little more emphasis on the gender side of things. Also because inclusion is such a very, it's so vast in so many ways, so many different aspects that we can consider. This is an easy one in because I'm trans and non-binary, and so it's an easier one because I can also draw from my own experience. I do not, however, speak for all trans or non-binary people, so don't necessarily take my word as gospel for all trans people. So gentle content warning if you are trans, non-binary, person of color, if you have a disability, if you're neurodivergent. There might be something that comes up. I don't foresee anything being particularly triggering, but just a gentle content warning, just in case, as we talk about exclusion, this can bring up examples that might be triggering. So I just wanted to offer that just in case. So there's that, and that means we can get started. So here's what we're going to cover: what inclusive writing is and what it's not, why it matters, common oversights or missed opportunities to include, how to write inclusively. I'll give you a 5-6 step process. And then some additional tips. Some will be related to the writing challenge that we're going to do, and I'll just spoil it right now. We're going to write a few lines of copy for a hypothetical dating app, because dating apps are just rich with opportunities to do a better job of inclusion. So that's what we'll cover. I'm hoping to save plenty of time for questions at the end. So like Will said, pop those into the Q&A tab, vote on the ones you like, and we'll get to those at the end. That said, if you have a question along the way, I have the chat open on the side. So if something really pressing comes up, I can't promise I'll see it because there's a lot going on the screen, but I will try. I will try. Excuse me. All right. So inclusive writing. Inclusive writing is an active and intentional process. It's the process of writing to intentionally include and create welcoming experiences for more people, particularly those from underrepresented groups. When I say underrepresented groups, and this is not saying anything against anybody who's in this room, okay? But if you are not white, if you are not cisgender, if you are not, or if you're heterosexual, if you have no disabilities, if you are neurotypical, you don't necessarily, you experience more inclusion than you do exclusion, generally speaking. Okay, learn more about this. You can Google intersectionality and privilege. It's a vast learning curve for a lot of us, especially those of us who grow up with any privilege. Moving on, inclusive writing, what it is not a one-time thing. This is not a one and done. You're not going to learn everything you need to know in this workshop. You're not going to go and one and done on whatever digital products you write for, and it's going to be suddenly inclusive. It's not something you can pay someone else to take care of. You can't outsource inclusion. You can bring in outside expertise, but inclusion has to come from within the company, within the product. And it's also not as vast as it is, as many opportunities as we have to include, as many facets of inclusion that we need to learn about and consider. It's not an impossibly massive or sensitive topic that's too complicated to bother with. I think that when we look at it in this way, we really run the risk of just getting scared off of doing it entirely. The term sensitive topic, I take issue with. This is one of the soapboxes that I will proudly stand on. is that when we call things sensitive topics, we're implying that the people who have been excluded in a given experience are being sensitive, when in actuality we're being insensitive. So that's what it's not. And why does it matter? This one's simple. Inclusion matters because people matter. If you want to argue that point, you may not want to stay for the rest of the workshop because it's all kind of based on that assumption, all right? Inclusion matters because people matter. And when we don't actively include, we risk unintentionally excluding. This comes from Kat Holmes. If you haven't read her book, Mismatch, How Inclusion Shapes Design, you absolutely must. It's just really, really critical text for the work of inclusion. And saying more about exclusion, moments of exclusion happen quite frequently for many users. If you've ever used a digital product and you feel like this isn't working well for me, or for you personally because of the situation you're in, because of who you are, you've experienced exclusion. Exclusion at its very best, if that exists, is annoying. And at its worst, it can actually be triggering. It can cause harm, and it contributes to systemic problems, racism, transphobia, ableism, etc., which are all systems that are based on this belief that some people matter as opposed to people matter. All right, so moving on. Let's look at what exclusion, what it looks like in practice. I've got a few examples. I'll give examples of most of these, not all of them. So I'll run down the list right now. Account creation and app onboarding, I have examples of that. That's really an area that's really just full of opportunities, y'all, really full of opportunities. Surveys and forms, because surveys and forms often ask about personal, or I would say personal things, but things that are aspects of identity and experience, background. Often the questions that are asked in surveys and forms and the options given within surveys and forms need work. They need work. Default profile options, thinking here mostly about situations where you create an account and the imagery or the placeholder text or whatever it might be automatically is gendered or assumes gender, ability, race, or some other aspect of identity or experience. Personalization options, ways that this is often a missed opportunity to include is in not providing the right kinds of accessibility settings or any at all, but also within the account settings. I'm thinking about like, you'll see examples of this in a minute, but when I create a profile on a website or an account on a website, being able to go in and change my name, to update my pronouns or gender, or personalize it in other ways is important and is often not an option. And when it is an option, it doesn't always, to the next point, connect with ongoing communications. And I have a juicy example of this that I'll give you in just a minute. Moving on, before lists and CTAs, this is one part that's not gender related. It's very much related to, so for people who use assistive devices like screen readers, very commonly you'll see before lists or before CTAs, copy that will use directional language. So below, click below to do this thing, right? And it's unnecessary. And it also, if you are listening to the page as opposed to reading it visually, that language does absolutely nothing except tell you that the people who wrote it didn't really think about you when they did it, okay? Alt text, headings, closed captions, this is basic accessibility stuff. It's part of global accessibility guidelines. And still often overlooked, because if you look at the quality of the alt text that you find, the quality of the headings, the quality of the closed captions, it's usually somewhat lacking, okay? Or I would say often somewhat lacking. And then really literally anywhere else in the user journey, you can find opportunities for this. The starting point is a learning process where you start noticing more of these opportunities, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Right now, we're gonna look at some juicy examples, all right? So we're gonna start with surveys and forms because it's so many examples that I run across on a daily basis. Here's one. These are gonna focus on gender, but okay, so we say gender, required field, and then we say male, female, or rather not to say, which is driving my editor brain a little crazy. Male, female, rather not say. Does anybody want to pop in the comments? Do you see any issues with this just at first glance? This is not a test. I want to kind of just throw it out to the room. Anybody? Get like 3 seconds. 5. Okay, we'll talk about it. So gender and sex are 2 different things. Also, thank you, assuming binary gender, assuming you're one or the other. Yeah, oh my gosh, this is so good. Yes, okay. Why is gender required? Oh, y'all are just really bringing it. Okay. Makes it feel a little bit shameful. Good. This is not, I mean, that's not good, but this is a good observation. There's no other option. All right. And Simona, what Simona said, gender, social, sex is biological, and it's more complex. It can be more complex than that, depending on, I mean, you can get into like gender stuff and feminist things and queer theory and things, but yes, exactly. There are not enough options. If we're asking for gender, the thing that should follow is not female, male, whatever else, because we're going from what is this person's identity to what sex were they assigned at birth, right? Which these are 2 different things. And so really, if we were going to revise this, we would say gender, woman, man, rather not say, but then as others said, an other option could be nice. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Micah, good point. Yeah, it doesn't explain why we need to know gender or how this information is going to be used. Do you know how many times I have downloaded an app and immediately taken it off my phone because they asked for my gender, and it was like, you don't need to know that. Why do you need to know that? Right. So there's the first option. Okay. Gosh, you guys, I said guys for a group, that was gendered language. These are really good observations that you're having here. Okay, so let's move on to the next example. See what you think of this one. Besides, okay, pretend it says woman, man for the first 2. So we fixed the sex versus gender problem. What would you change about this? As a non-binary person, wish this wasn't even needed. Oh man, preach. Yes, same. What do we see here? So we've got woman, man, transgender, other. I'm gonna give it just another couple of seconds in case anyone has anything they want to say before I keep talking. Okay, I'm gonna go. So if we go woman, man, and then transgender, I'm gonna stop there because we have radio buttons here, which means we can select one, right? And yet many transgender people identify within the binary. There are transgender women, there are transgender men, right? And so setting that as a separate single select option, it invalidates the gender of many transgender people. And then going down to the other option, and a lot of you talked about having an other option, and I agree that it is good to have another way for people to identify more accurately. However, this is what I call the other bucket, and I don't think anybody likes to end up there. So rather than calling someone other, there could be more mindful ways to present this. All right, let's move on. This is a question that is in SurveyMonkey's question bank, or it used to be. And this is by far one of the better ones that I've seen. Still not perfect, right? But gender, how do you identify? We fixed the sex versus gender problem. We've got man, non-binary, woman. Prefer to self-describe below. I mean, I would prefer that there were more options, and I would prefer that it wasn't single select, because I know people who identify in multiple ways. Their gender crosses more, or it ticks off more categories than you might assume, right? So having something like a multi-select checkbox or something like that could be useful. Completely unrelated to surveys and forms, but this is an example of directional language. So it says, prefer to self-describe below. Do we need the below? We don't need it, right? Because we can see it's there. And if we couldn't see it, maybe we could tick the radio button if we wanted to do that, and then have the self-describe box, have that pop out, right? So we know that it needs to be filled out. So there are other ways with UX UI solutions to eliminate the directional language. So, all right, there's the first round of examples. Now we're going to talk about dating apps, y'all. This is going to be fun. This is a German dating app, which if you don't understand German, that's okay. You don't have to. Essentially, they have a special test, apparently, that you can take, and it will find you a partner. Nice that they use partner and not anything more gendered. But then we have on the left, I am a woman or a man, and I am searching for a woman or a man. Who does this work for? It works for, anybody want to pop that in the chat? There's limited options, right? This works for, waiting for anybody, no? Okay. It works for men who are looking for women, women who are looking for men, men who are looking for men, or women who are looking for women. So again, we're back to the gender binary, and it's stuck there, right? So if a non-binary person or somebody anywhere else in the gender verse, okay, popped onto this app, they would immediately walk away, more than likely, because there's no place for me here, right? So let's look at the next one. This is one. So I was writing the article that's kind of attached to this event and prepping this presentation. I downloaded so many dating apps to find like the best examples. Wow, y'all, there's a lot out there, a lot of work to be done. This is Hinge. And Hinge, I think they're doing a lot of good in the sense that like they're making a real effort in their UX and UI to be more inclusive. And as you can see, like, what is your gender? I was able to type in non-binary, which is great. It's not as common as you might think. And there were a whole lot more options. It was pretty exhaustive, which is great. But then take a look at the rest of the screen. Show me two people. So who are we going to show this profile to, right? The people who will see this profile will be men or women. What's the problem here? What's the problem here? Anybody? Toss something in the chat there. There's a mismatch. What is it? Anybody? Y'all are quiet. You went quiet. It's okay. I won't put pressure on you. So we're going to allow someone to identify their gender correctly. And I'm sorry about my cat. She's mad at me for closing the door on her. We're going to allow somebody to identify their gender correctly, but then we're going to show their profile to people who may not be interested in them. So as a non-binary person, I don't know for sure that men or women, people who identify specifically in those ways are going to be interested in dating me, right? And so there's a mismatch, right? Now look at this second screen because it gets a little bit more convoluted with Hinge. So we move to the next one. Who do you want to date? Men, women, or everyone? Now I don't know about anybody else in this room. Everyone feels a little broad. It feels a little broad, but it's still better than what we had here, right? Men or women. And maybe that I'm not a developer. I know like 3 things about HTML. Not enough to know like if maybe there's something in the algorithm that they're trying to meet the needs of the algorithm here. But if that's the case, we need to understand why, right? We need to understand why. So there are dating app examples, and here's the one I wanted to show you. This is the juicy. So if we allow people to update options in their profiles, we need that to carry on through other communications, right? So prefacing this with not every transgender person wants to, needs to, chooses to change their name. I did. a long while back, okay? A number of years before I got this email, which is about a year ago, and I do save these screenshots. I hold a grudge, y'all, I do. So I had updated all of my accounts, everything. And this is ironically coming from their loyalty program. And I'm thinking that if you want my loyalty, you should use my correct name, right? So, but immediately at the top in the subject line, you have dead name. Side note, dead name is what we call a transgender person's former name. And when you call a transgender person by their dead name, it's called dead naming. It's a microaggression. Don't do it, okay? So immediately they dead name me, view your current e-summary. And then they're sending it to my email address, which is my correct email address with my correct name. But, so I mean, the profile change went through. But then immediately, hello, dead name. They're doing it again. Right? That's another example. So, and I know these things can be fairly complex. I know, especially like maybe in bigger companies, more difficult to translate profile changes from, get them from point A to point B. But this was that we're talking like at least 2 years, 3 years, even 4. It's been a while, okay, and this is still not changed. So another aspect, another example where inclusion can be done better. All right, let's move on. Whoops, hang on. Technology, I can do it. There we are. Okay, so let's talk about how to make these kinds of things not happen. So how does inclusive copy happen? It doesn't just happen. It is an intentional choice. It is an active and ongoing process that involves a lot of learning, probably making some mistakes, but then learning from those mistakes as well and getting better and better. So here are 5 steps that you can take. If you want to screen grab that or anything like that, I'm going to run through them really quickly, and we'll talk about each in a little bit more detail right now. So first, check your ego at the door. Abandon the myth of the average user. Identify and challenge your assumptions. Research is absolutely critical. And then involving more people in the writing and feedback process. And what does that look like? I'm going to give you a step 0 first. Wile E. Coyote is coming in to help me illustrate this. So it is not your job to write copy that makes an entire company or an entire product look more inclusive than it actually is. Okay, so if you go back to the German dating app example, there's probably something in that algorithm that's going to exclude transgender or non-binary or anybody else in the genderverse. It's probably going to exclude them anyways, somewhere in the algorithm, right? Because it's set up in a way that's so binary, it's hard to imagine that doesn't translate into the DNA of the product itself. You would not want to, if you were a UX writer for this product, you wouldn't want to be like, oh, I'm going to write this onboarding, this home screen, I'm going to write this more inclusively, put all the gender options, right? Because then you're setting users up for an incongruent user experience anyways, and that is not what we're trying to do, right? We don't want to set them up for that disappointment. Like Wile E. Coyote, he thought he had ground under his feet, and it turns out he didn't. We don't want to do this to our users, right? So that's the first thing that we need to do is understand who does our product include? Who does it not include? Can that be changed? And if not, how do we adapt our desire for inclusion to the inherent values of the product, right? Moving on. Step 1, check your ego at the door. There's not a whole lot of room for personal ego in this, y'all. It is a learning process. You've got to be able to have an open mind, to admit that you don't know, and to learn. But even beyond that, to be able to, times that I've looked back at old copy that I've written, I'm like, it's actually really ableist or racist, or this thing that I wrote that I didn't know it at the time, but to recognize those things and check your ego at the door, have the humility to recognize that, make it right and learn from it and do better next time, right? So that's the first step. Chances are that the more privilege you have, this is going back to that thing I mentioned, intersectionality, the more privilege you have, the more learning and unlearning you'll need to do, right? Really, really, I beg you, if you don't know much about intersectionality, it's really critical. If you want to do really, if you want to make a difference in terms of designing, writing to include, an understanding of this is really key. All right, so moving on to step 2. And I have a coffee grinder on there for a reason. Let me move my coffee so I don't spill anything. Abandon the myth of the average user, all right? Hear me when I say this, okay? There is no average user. It does not exist, all right? Is there a bell curve somewhere in the user base? Yes, probably. Should we write only to the majority in that bell curve? Absolutely not. And we'll talk about why right now. So think about what you did today, where you've been today, what's been happening, whether you've stayed at home or been out in the world. You're a changing being, right? Moving around in a world that is also changing, which means the people using our digital products are never, or I would say rarely, using them under the exact circumstances we imagine they're using them every time and all the way through that journey, right? Things change, things change. So example I have here is my coffee grinder, and I have it here because I want to show you how this works, all right? Excuse me. So I get up every morning, I drag myself into the kitchen. Really, I'm not a morning person these days. And I make coffee. And part of what helps me to keep from like just blasting off into the day and getting overwhelmed and distracted is slowing down to grind my coffee beans, all right? So this was a gift from a friend, and it has given me so much joy. But there are design flaws. Okay, so sorry about my cat. She's really mad. All right, so to grind these coffee beans, I have to, and just watch my hands, okay? I have to pop off the top, and then I have to put the coffee beans in here. It's pretty narrow opening, even for me, so there's always like this, like I've got my hands like this, and then I'm pouring the beans in, and they always end up spilling a little bit, but it's still fun. So I fill that up with beans, and you put the top back on, right? And there's this little hexagon type thing here. I had to attach the handle. Clementine, honey? Sorry. You have to attach the handle, and then you got to hold it, and then you grind, right? And you grind the beans. So this is how this works, which is great. It's great most days, because most days my body works the way that the manufacturer had in mind when they designed this, right? My body matches the expectations for this product, all right? I promise she'll stop in just a minute. Maybe I shouldn't promise that. But last year, I wrecked my bicycle, and I temporarily lost use of my right hand, which means that this process suddenly more complicated, right? Suddenly I realized the people who made this, they were not thinking about this particular situation, right? So out of curiosity, I was talking to a friend last night who has CP, cerebral palsy, and she mentioned that, so I showed her this, I was talking about this presentation and this example to see if it would really work. And she said, well, the thing is, I wouldn't even buy a product like that because I couldn't use it. Because if someone has any issue with basic motor function, or even fine motor function in terms of attaching this in just the right way, right? You can't use it. It just doesn't work, because it takes a little bit of elbow grease to spin it around and grind the beans, right? And it's not exactly a quick process either. And so anyway, so she mentioned that the one thing that would very simple fix for this product would be to attach a clamp to the bottom so that you could clamp it onto the edge of the counter, right? So very simple design fix that would make it suddenly more accessible, not only to someone like my friend who has CP, but to somebody who needs to do something on their phone, or is holding a kid, or whatever it might be, right? So there is no average user, right? If you need to say that out loud, please do. Right? So just like that example of a inclusive design with a physical product, inclusive writing it creates copy that works for more users in more situations, right? That's what it's about. In other words, it's just good UX. We're all about creating good experiences for users, right? And this is basic UX, right? Okay, so let's move on to step 3. This is not an easy one. Sometimes I think this one probably takes the most work because you have to in some ways get a little insight in realizing what you don't know, right? So identifying and challenging your assumptions. So I've asked a question here in bold, the bold letters there, that will hopefully help to kind of break that ice a bit, to help you kind of get under the surface of what are the assumptions that I'm really making here. And this is specifically in the context of UX writing, product design, but what do users, and let's say people, because that's what they are, right? What do people have to do or know, or who do they have to be in order to navigate this experience in the way that I have in mind, right? And this is not an unfamiliar question to anybody who's running in UX circles, right? This is not an unfamiliar question, but it can help you look and see, okay, so with a coffee grinder, we're assuming that somebody can hold on to it tight enough and long enough to make their morning coffee, right? We're assuming that they can pull the lid off. We're assuming they can attach the handle. We're assuming they can do this sort of opposing sort of action, right? These are assumptions that we're making. What if they can't do that? What do we do then? So that's one way to get kind of under the surface of that. If you have other ideas for how to realize how much you don't know and to get the compass needle pointing a bit in terms of where do I need to look, if you have ideas for that, please share them with me. I've created an article that goes kind of along with this event, and I would like to add it to that. So if you have ideas, that'd be great. Moving on to step 4, not yet, never mind. These questions will help you find those ways to be more inclusive. Oh yes, so in a minute we're going to be doing a writing exercise. So for our dating app example, we're going to be writing for a hypothetical dating app. Maybe we assumed that our average user, heavy on the air quotes, is cisgender or is identifies within the gender binary as a man or a woman. What if they're not? What if they're not? All right. And now we move on to step 4, which is just research. So with inclusive design, core tenet of inclusive design is to design with, not for. And this is where UX research becomes really important. I mean, anybody working in UX, you don't just design a solution that might work, right? You talk to the people who are using your product. You get underneath how do they use the product? What are their needs? What are their goals? What are their pain points? You want to understand that, right? It's the same thing for inclusive UX writing. The first step is to do your desk research, scour the internet, read books, read blogs, immerse yourself in the work of writers and designers who are already doing the work of inclusion. If you need a starting point with that, Kat Holmes. Anything Kat Holmes does, I'm a fan. She's brilliant. Also, the Microsoft Designs Inclusive Design Toolkit is fantastic. I linked to that in the article. You'll get a link to this article after the event. And then, of course, conducting inclusive user research. We've done events on this. We have a video on this. I've linked to that video in the article. I can tell you about the article. I promise you'll get it. Inclusive user research is all about finding those people who you need to learn from in order to make the experience work for them, right? So broadening, including a broader spectrum of humanity in your user research in that phase of the design and writing process. All right, and that brings us to step 5, which is to involve more people in the process, and specifically in the feedback process. When you write a particular piece of copy, you want to make sure it works for a particular kind of person. Check with somebody who is like that particular kind of person, right? Ask them. Ask them for feedback on the writing. Incorporate that into real changes in the writing. And this is important, especially if you're turning to a colleague who is maybe you want to design, you want to write in a way that works for someone with a particular kind of disability, right? And you have a colleague who has this particular disability, and you go to them and you ask them, would you give me feedback on this writing? I want to make sure it works for people who have X disability, right? Don't ask them to do that just because they're a good colleague, all right? Compensate them for their time and effort. That is not just cognitive labor, that's emotional labor, and probably takes a lot more than you realize. So important note there. All right, whew, taking a breath. Okay, you know what, before we jump into this, I'll give you a second to absorb. It's like a massive Massive information dump. All right, I'm gonna give you, we've got 3 slides here with just a few tips. I'm gonna keep an eye on the chat. So as we talk about these, because they're more practical, very practical in nature, if you have questions as that comes up, I'm gonna keep an eye on the chat and see if I can answer them as we go. Excuse me. So mostly gender sexuality related, but not entirely. First of all, never, ever, ever, ever assume race, gender, abilities, etc. If it's helpful to know these things, ask, but ask in a way that is inclusive and optional, and clarify why you're asking and what you'll do with the information. And this is related to the second point. So a lot of what makes writing inclusive, well, no, let me back up. If you're asking about aspects of a person's identity, experience, background, chances are that these are things that have been very much the basis of their experiences of exclusion, discrimination, harassment. And you need to treat it with the respect that warrants. So just be aware of that as you go in and ask for this information, regardless of the context. Great alt text, avoiding directional language, that will create copy that will immediately work better for screen readers. But then also italicized and underlined words. I learned this, the underlined words bit just recently. Italicized and underlined words create visual noise that can make it difficult for readers with dyslexia. And so it's important to avoid those things. If you need emphasis, bold-faced font is effective. Yeah. All right, so moving into the gender stuff. They, them, my pronouns. They can and should be used as a singular pronoun, especially if you're uncertain of a person's gender identity. If you're talking about like a hypothetical or, the anonymous user, the user did such and such, he or she did blah, blah, blah. That is not inclusive, right? Just they, right? It's been used this way for a long time. It's in the dictionary. We're good to go. All right, a few more. Avoid gendered salutations, Mr. and Mrs. Use their name. It's more personal. If you need it to be more formal, mix is one that's coming into wider use. Even here in Germany, I've started to see it more. And so that's one way to do it. Also aware that not everybody in this event is necessarily writing in English. And there I would just say, you know your language better than I do in terms of how to greet people in a way that doesn't assume gender. Okay, so then moving on. If you need to ask about gender, remember, as we said, sex and gender are not the same thing. What do you actually need to know? And don't forget that if you're asking really about either of these, intersex people exist, and they're very often left out of the options that we offer on like surveys, forums, onboarding, etc. Never imply that a person is one gender or another because of their anatomy. It's just not true. And then last one, I promise, last slide, and then we're going to start writing. Be careful not to assume, this is specifically related to our writing challenge. Don't assume that people have or are interested in a particular kind of person or a particular kind of relationship. Relationships and people are all they're varied, and they're valid. There are more than 3 genders. Avoid the other bucket at almost any cost, right? Some people don't mind them, but this othering that can happen is, it's good to avoid. Partner or spouse is better than a gendered alternative. And then remember, and this comes from a conversation I actually had with another friend just last week, that the visibility or presence of certain types of people is in like the dating app setting can be problematic for some users. It's important to find a way to create a safe space for people, to let them determine like who is going to see this profile, who's going to have access to me in those ways, right? All right, here we go. Are you ready to write? Okay, let's do a little writing. Here's the scenario. You're part of a team. Let's say it's us, all right? We have designed a dating app, all right? It is your job to write copy for the app onboarding process. So imagine someone, we'll call them Jordan, has downloaded the app. This is a picture of Jordan, all right? Notice we don't know Jordan's gender, all right? There are visual cues and we might make some assumptions, but we don't really know, all right? So they've downloaded the app, they open it up on their phone, get their profile set up. What happens next, right? So there are going to be a series of questions probably, right? And we need to decide, here's our challenge, how to write these questions and decide what options we're going to give them, all right? So question number 1, get ready to type into the chat, okay, with your ideas. How are we going to ask Jordan's gender? Let's take these one at a time. And we'll do 2 if we have time. I think we're okay. Any ideas there initially? How will we ask Jordan's gender? Anybody? A little worried that, did everybody leave? Here we are. Nope. Hello? Nothing yet? I'll give you a hint. Okay, we're offering more than 3 options, right? We're allowing them to identify accurately. Does this need to be optional, do you think, for a dating app? Opinions on that? Anybody? Do y'all need time to think? What's going on there? It's very quiet. It wasn't this quiet last time. Hey, Will, are you there?
Well, I'm back. Yeah. There are some great answers coming in the public chat.
Yeah. I want to try and get a few responses to the how to write these different questions, but I'm not sure if like hold up. Y'all, my computer's glitching. Give me a second. Sorry, Will. I'm sorry I bothered you.
No worries. I can read out some of the answers that have been given.
Yes. I'm so sorry, y'all. My chat is lagging. Can you look in the main chat, Will, and tell me what some of the responses would be to this first question, how we should ask Jordan's gender? I'm so sorry, y'all. It's not working.
No problem. We've got some great answers. Hi, Jordan. What would you like us to know? How do you currently identify? No single select, first of all.
Yeah.
Just leave an open option to write your gender. Hi, Jordan. What is your gender? Tell us more about you. That's very open-ended.
Awesome.
Hi. What are your pronouns? How do you identify?
Did somebody suggest just asking for pronouns instead?
There's one answer. Yep. Leave it open to write in and/or checkboxes to select multiple options, and additionally have space to include pronouns.
Nice. I like that a lot. My chat's doing weird things, Will. It just suddenly is like, okay, maybe I'm caught up now. All right. Joy says when they start typing, maybe options can pop up. I like that. I think Hinge did something similar where it pops up like tags almost as you start typing. So it's pretty cool. So it sounds like a lot of these ideas are kind of centering around offering exhaustive options, right? Lee, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, says it'll be hard to match that person with someone without gender as dating apps. Usually that's how they decide on what or who or what profiles to match up, right, to connect. And that's very true. I wish I knew more about coding and dating app algorithms, or do I? I don't know, it could be a deep dark hole. But I think that, asking what is your gender or asking for pronouns. Oh, thank you, Lee. Okay. So I think asking for gender or pronouns in that varied way. There is one, it's a queer dating app called Lex. They do not ask gender, they just ask pronouns, and they allow people to disclose gender when they're ready. which is nice, but also I'm not sure how that would work in a space that's not explicitly queer, because I feel like gender takes a little bit, it weirdly like takes more of a prominent role in terms of who we're interested in, who we're not, when you're not in an explicitly queer space. C says, I like the pronoun ID a lot. Yeah, me too. Okay, so we've got some options there. So for time's sake, we'll move on pretty quickly for this one, but for the second question, find out, how are we gonna find out what gender or genders Jordan wants to see in the profiles we show them? How do we know who to match Jordan with? If we do, putting people in dangerous positions. Mariana, would you say a little bit more about that possibly? Just type a little bit more about what you mean there. I'll watch for your response. For others, asking just pronouns, running into the shoes of pronouns not necessarily indicating someone's gender identity. Absolutely. So that's something important to know if you don't already, is that pronouns don't necessarily indicate someone's gender, which is very, very true. And so that can be tricky. I know that Lex operates in a way that's more, it's very much like, it's almost like queer classifieds. Like sometimes people post, I have free kombucha, come get it. Or somebody wants like particular kind of like date or something they want to go do, or going to this event or whatever, who wants to come with me? So it's more like classifieds and people can respond, which is interesting. But so it's a little trickier, right? Would we agree that it's maybe a little trickier to, it's a little trickier to solve the problem of, so we know how to ask gender. It sounds like we have a lot more ideas and more certainty about that. But in terms of who do we connect them with, right? It gets trickier, right? I'm gonna wait for any additional thoughts, or if Mariana wants to say anything about what would put people in dangerous positions, because I want to think about that a little bit more too. Typing and choices popping up. Yep, that's very true. One thought that I had when I was looking at the Hinge onboarding was, why don't we have, so if we're giving all these options for gender, like the self-identification of gender, why don't we give the same options for who we want to see? Or, you know what I mean? Like give the same options for that and who we want to date. Like, I wonder if like having the same options could work. I think I read something when I was writing the article about OkCupid doing something like that, but I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. All right. Okay, I haven't heard from Mariana. So we're going to call this, add a multi-select for both. Sharon, yes, love that idea. Absolutely. Because gender identity and sexuality, sexual orientation, it's so much more complex than just like, yes, not for everyone, but when you look at the whole of humanity, yeah, it's a whole lot more complex, right? Oh, here we are. Toggle tokens, and Jordan can choose what they're interested in. I like that. Francesca, yeah, okay, OkCupid. OkCupid, I know, was one of the first ones that offered really exhaustive options for gender. And then Mariana says, thinking about what you said about the queer app, that you could disclose it later. Yeah. That it could put people in dangerous situations where others feel cheated. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. Especially if you get somebody on there who not everybody is well-intentioned. Yeah. I know in Lex, you can create a profile and you can disclose that if you would like. But it's also very much an app that encourages chatting with people and kind of, getting to know them. And so it's, yeah. You'll agree, it's a difficult design problem. It's a difficult writing problem to solve because it does so much interact with the design, the algorithm. It's like the whole picture, right? It's the whole picture. Jordan, who would you like to match with? Men, women, trans women, non-binary, gender fluid. That could work. Yeah, I think, Joy, it might depend on, like others had said, like what options are we giving for Jordan's own gender, right? Because I mean, other people's gender could be just as complex as Jordan's, right? Ooh, Kaylee, good one. I like that. How would you describe the people you'd like to meet? Same options plus maybe an open-ended people option. Nice. Y'all are doing well. This is great. Okay. Allowing people to specify gender identities and include or exclude in potential matches. Yeah. And I think now I'm curious. I don't know how curious. I don't know if I'm curious enough to get on OkCupid, y'all. I don't know if I'm that curious. But I'd be curious to see how that one works. Yeah. In order for us to show you interesting partners, please select from the available tags or write your own and like it. The write your own, I imagine, could get complex with, the almighty algorithm, but yeah. Wow, y'all, I am super impressed. You've got this. This is great. Okay, Will, are you there? Sorry, I brought you in and then kicked you back out.
I'm back.
Okay, we're ready for questions.
All right, let's open up for the Q&A part then. We do already have some questions and some which have been upvoted too. Apologies in advance if I pronounce anybody's names wrong, so that's not intentional. First question we have is from Auti. Regarding surveys forms, how to find the balance between avoiding people feeling othered or being in the empty box and the continuously growing list of gender identities that makes it difficult to be 100% inclusive?
Yes, I mean, that's the answer. It is difficult, and yet, I don't know. I thought about this when I was trying to figure out the Hinge problem, right? Because it's also a Bumble problem, according to one of my friends. Like, it's a dating app problem, right? I think, y'all, we have put human beings on the moon. We can transplant hearts from one body into another. We can figure this out. Like, it has to be possible, right? And I think at the very least, if you're explaining to people what effort have you put into this to be inclusive, if you're opening up, if you're including a question in a survey or form that's like, how can we make this better next time? You can have something like the other bucket, but not make it the other bucket. Like, where else in the genderverse do you identify open text field? And so the specific words you use there really matters. The other is somewhat dismissive, and so I think that alone will improve it.
Next question from Mariana. How do you translate data analysis like Google Analytics from binary to a more inclusive analysis? Better said, are there alternatives?
Oh, say that again.
How do you translate data analysis like Google Analytics from binary to a more inclusive analysis? Are there alternatives?
Boy, that's. I'm going to say that's a question for Google. I would give a little feedback there, because if things are reported in binary by like third party or someone external, the best you can do is report that. I reported things to Hinge. I was like, write, not copy. So, yeah, I don't know if I can answer that. It would be more of a question, honestly, for Google. Yeah.
We also have data analytics events. Maybe that would also be a good question to bring up there too.
Yeah.
A question from Sharon. If your product doesn't care about or need to understand gender in order to serve its purpose, is it better to simply not capture?
Yes. Yeah. I think I said this before. Like I have downloaded apps and immediately taken it off because they asked me my gender and I didn't understand why. And I was just like, why do you need to know this? It feels nosy. Not even just necessarily nosy, but sometimes I feel like it's people within the company trying to prove that they know, right? They know they're inclusive, and so they want to show that off, while they're kind of forcing people to disclose something that's in many ways, very personal. So yeah, I think if it's not inherently useful to you, your process, to creating a better experience for the people using your product, why ask? Yeah.
I think that was going back to something you said earlier in the presentation about having the reasoning for why you're asking for certain information.
Yeah.
That's always a good premise.
Yeah. I think if you don't have a good reason to ask, what is the data you're going for anyway? Yeah.
Salman asks, what is the issue with the click below to read more for screen readers?
Can you say that again?
I'm not sure if that maybe was referring to something earlier. What is the issue with the click below to read more for screen readers?
Yeah.
The directional language.
Yeah, so directional language, if you think about this, if you're reading, say, I'm going to say an article. So you're reading an article and it says, below will list XYZ, right? If you're reading that, it does visually appear below. I would argue that you still don't need that language because people can scroll and see that. But for somebody who is listening, it doesn't come below, it comes after, right? But after this, that feels a little awkward too. I would argue that it's just not even necessary. If you need to indicate that you're going to be talking about something in a minute, you can say, we'll cover that in a moment, or in just a sec, or something like this. If you're saying, click below to do this thing, if you're putting that microcopy close enough to the actual CTA, they're going to be able to see it. It's going to be something they can figure out, and so it's largely unnecessary, and it becomes a small moment of exclusion where, and people who use screen readers are probably quite used to it, unfortunately, but they're listening to this and they say, okay, below, all right, well, I know what they mean, but yeah.
Emerson, I've got a fantastic, you'll love this question because I know you spent a lot of work on this recently, but what is your approach for creating user personas?
Oh, yes. All right. So I just created some buyer personas for the marketing team at Career Foundry. It's a lot of fun. Okay, say the question again. No, I want to say the right thing about it instead of like doing a full information dump about personas.
So I think it's more of a general question. What is your approach for creating a user persona? I suppose we'll frame it in the in being inclusive.
Yeah. I would start by saying, read our article on the blog about user persona spectrums, because that is a big solve right there. But I think the important thing is, again, same with surveys, forms, or anything else, ask, what do you really need to know? Because traditional user personas are heavy on the demographics. And do you really need those? I would argue that you don't. Whereas what you can have instead is information about your users and situations that they experience. Check out Microsoft Design's Inclusive Design Toolkit. They have like a spectrum of these considerations where they have like a temporary physical limitation, right? Versus a situational, temporary, permanent, right? So situational is, I'm using my phone and I need to grind my coffee in the morning, right? Temporary, I wrecked my bike, I can't use my right hand right now. Permanent, I have CP, or I'm an amputee, or something like this, right? So that's a good one to look at. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say more generally about user personas, I mean, I think because we're all working remotely, and also lots of customers that we have today are digital customers. When you have a persona in front of you, it really makes you think, okay, it's really about the people, and you've got 4, 5, 6, however many personas in front of you, and you're thinking, okay, this is actually who I'm speaking to, whereas before it could just be numbers on the screen.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got a question here from Simona. Great question. How would you ask a person for their preferred pronoun in a formal setting, like a business meeting, for example?
So easiest thing to do is to just say, hey, I'm Emerson, my pronouns are they, them. If people are comfortable doing it themselves, they'll do it back, right? They'll reciprocate. If you're in maybe a less formal setting, it could be appropriate to be like, hey, what are your pronouns? If you do that in a more formal setting, I feel like it can kind of throw people off. I usually start by saying mine first, and it kind of opens the door for that. Also, little side note, I usually avoid saying preferred pronouns since they're just their pronouns, right? Little.
And a follow-up question is also, can you expand on the difference between they, apologies if I get this wrong, but also Z and Z? That also the different, the kind of like the expanded, but also spectrum of pronouns.
Yeah. So I've never used the Zer pronouns. I don't know anybody who does. but I know a lot of people do. And the background of those, I'm not clear on, if I'm honest. They're just different pronouns. So I know that some people, and again, I can't speak for all, some people use the Z0 pronouns if the they them just really doesn't feel right. The pronouns thing is really about how people want, okay, so for me, my pronouns are about how do I want people to perceive me in a way that is accurate to my identity, right? For me, most common misgendering mistake is she, her. And when I get she, it's like a punch in the gut because it's not who I am, right? They, them really fits for me. And I kind of went with they, them pronouns. I considered Z0 pronouns, but I didn't do it in the end because the place where I was living, I was like, I feel like I'm just gonna have to explain this all the time, right? And I had to do it with they, them pronouns as well, but not quite as much as the others, right? And so I think it's just very much personal, I don't want to say preference, the personal resonance with who am I and how do I want people to perceive me and respect who I am. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
That is the last question. Has anyone got one last question they want to add quickly? I'm just checking the public chat. Lots of thank yous. No, I think that's everything.
Awesome. So the article that we'll send an email out after the event with the event recording, and the article link will be in that, but it's already live on the Career Foundry blog if you want to look it up. I've got more examples plus resources on there, and so yeah, check that out. And if you are a person of color, if you have a disability, if you're trans, non-binary, elsewhere in the genderverse, if you're neurodiverse, and you have ideas for things I can add to this article, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know. I want to make this better if I can. So thanks all for joining.
Awesome. Emerson, thank you so much. That was really a fantastic workshop. Like I said beforehand, we will be sending around some blog articles, and also there will be a recording of this webinar later for anybody that wants to watch it or anybody that missed it. And if you're interested in doing a Career Foundry program and you're not currently a student, after this webinar event, there'll also be a booking page where you can book a call with a program advisor. Like I said before, if there's any questions that you've got about the curriculum, course layout, payment options, all kinds of stuff, program advisors are there and they are ready and waiting to assist you with making the best choice for you and your career. So that said, thank you everybody for attending, and good evening or good morning or wherever you are. And we've got some thank yous, and the webinar is ending in 9 seconds.
Have a good